Hello? Oh, hi. I'm going to share what I changed on the Nikon Z6III to make the camera a little bit more me. Now, this may not be you, but this is definitely me.
Omar Gonzalez is a well-known portrait and event photographer. He is best known for his chic urban portraits, as well as his ability to capture the peak emotion in a scene. He's also a Jim Carrey wannabe.
That was creepy. Okay, the first thing I do on a Nikon camera before I start changing settings is I turn off the IBIS, because if you don't do that, you're gonna hear this. Next thing I do is change the file name so I can easily identify the camera just from the file name, so I'll name it Z6III. Next, out of the box, the camera only shoots JPEGs, but I like to shoot RAW as well, so I will usually set it to RAW plus JPEG. Now by default, this green autofocus assist light is on, so I dive into the menu and turn it off. Now out of the box, to autofocus with this camera, you have to half press hold the shutter, but I am personally what's called a back button focus shooter person, so I have to take that off. So I'll dive into the menu and turn off the shutter and actually just use the AF on button only on the back. Next, under menu A5, I like to store the autofocus points by orientation. This is because sometimes I like to use a nice little skinny autofocus point, and when I turn the camera over, I want my autofocus point to change for whatever I use vertically, horizontally, vertically. Next, I go to A8 and I like to limit my autofocus mode. There's like too many choices in this camera, which is a good thing, but I turn off most of the pinpoint I turn off and all of the dynamics I turn off, and all the other ones I keep on. F2. The F2 menu is where you can actually set your custom controls, but if you press the I, you'll actually see this little icon, which is a camera with 3 little lines, and that is a shortcut to take you to this screen. Now, before you do what I do, just know that I set these things up for how I shoot in my situation. I'm an event photographer, so for example, autofocus, getting the fleeting moment and a moment that won't ever happen again is super important to me. So you're gonna see that I assign autofocus modes to 3 buttons. I use up 3 buttons. But if you're kind of like a slower photographer, or you're doing macro or landscape, and autofocus isn't as crucial, then you could free up some of the buttons to set them to other things. So you have to sort of figure out what works best for you. Okay, the first thing is, by default, the front dial is the aperture on the lens, and the rear dial is the shutter speed. That's a Nikon thing, but I grew up with Canon, so I actually always use shutter speed on the front and aperture in the back, because when I had a Canon camera, it was a big wheel on the back for aperture, and shutter was always my index finger, so it became muscle memory. Don't change it if it doesn't work for you, but I can go into the menu and actually flip what the command dials do, and so now my aperture is the back and shutter is the front. Now, another function I changed from front dial to back dial is the modes, the autofocus modes and the autofocus area. By default, the back one will change from AFS to AFC to manual, but it's actually easier to change the one you change more, because I'm parked in AFC. The one I change more is the area. I go from a little box to a full area to 3D. So I need the back dial, which is more convenient to flip quickly, to be the one that changes my autofocus area. And I'll just leave the front one to change to AFC, AFS, and manual, which I rarely ever do. So now that we have the different area modes we can cycle, we want a button to activate. Now by default, it's the front one. You can totally keep that there, but I like something a little bit more on the top. I set my record movie button to actually be the AF on activator dude, okay? Now by default, it does have a cool function, the record mode. It actually gets rid of all information quickly on your camera if you wanted a nice clean display. But I don't usually care, so I have given up on that button. So now it's my choose the autofocus area really quickly that way, and the bottom one is white balance if I need to switch that quickly. Now personally, I don't shoot autofocus single mode, which is where the camera picks a spot and freezes and stops. I found continuous autofocus mode to be faster in most of these modern cameras. And out of the box, there is no confirmation that the camera has grabbed focus. You actually have to turn that on in the menu. Now to do that, you go to menu A10 and you tell the camera, hey, I want autofocus confirmation display to be on. And then every time it grabs focus, you'll see a green color. Now, one of the F2 options is a control wheel that's on the lenses. Some of the Nikon lenses have this little wheel that's on there, but I find that I always bump it. So for a while I had it for aperture, for a while there I had it for ISO, but I kind of always bump it if I grab the lens. So I will turn that function to none. Now, if you look at the back of the camera, you have an autofocus on button, which is, conveniently placed by your thumb for your back button focusers. And to the left of it, there's a beautiful big button that changes your display mode. And pressing the display button will cycle through a bunch of different views, which you can customize, by the way. You can remove some of this information. You can get rid of one of the screens that cycles through. But I actually use the display back button, which thank you, Nikon, for letting us be able to, put a function on that. I use that as a saved focus mode. And the way my camera autofocuses is I have 3 buttons. I have the AF on, which will just focus in any autofocus area mode I'm in. If I press my display back button, that will function as a 3D tracking mode. To set that, just go to the F2 menu and pick the option that says focus mode / AF area mode. And now every time I press that button, it goes to 3D, which is what I picked down the list. You can pick anything. You can make it a single focus point. Now, if these two fail, like for example, if I'm in the wrong mode, like my area mode is just somewhere wacky where my focus point is wrong, it's not grabbing focus, and this is grabbing maybe the wrong face and it's an emergency, well, the last ditch effort is I set the front function button, the top one, to be a single focus point. This is traditionally the fastest AF single focus point grab, little middle focus point, and I can grab the item, grab a face, and just as an emergency, push this one, and it will autofocus where I need. Now, it's still useful to cycle through your display modes, and it's kind of sad that you lost the display function for something else like autofocus. Or did you? You can actually set this little drive one here to display back. And so I can cycle through the display modes using this button. Now I do wish that Nikon would let us set this trash button because I rarely ever delete a photo. So that's a kind of a wasted button for me. So it'd be nice if that was an extra functional, customizable button, but it's not. Now, a lot of times I find my autofocus point is off to the side somewhere and I like to quickly center it. So I make the, by default, the OK button here is set to reset your autofocus point, but I find that one to be a little hard to find. But the little joystick, that moves your focus point anyway, if you're moving your focus point. So it also has a press function. And if you press, it can recenter your focus point and you're ready to go. Now that's the custom buttons for photography. Let me know if you need a video one. I can make a video custom button yada yada for you. All right, I hope that helps someone out there, and I'll see you guys next time.